The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio buzzed with its usual orchestrated energy, a symphony of bright lights, canned laughter, and meticulously rehearsed spontaneity. The air was thick with the scent of stage makeup and anticipation, but tonight, a darker undercurrent pulsed beneath the surface, like a predator circling unseen. Jimmy Kimmel stood in the wings, his trademark grin sharp and predatory, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculated malice. For 2 decades, he'd reigned as late-night royalty, a master of charm whose affable persona was a carefully crafted mask. Tonight, that mask concealed a mission not to entertain, but to destroy. His target was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star whose unapologetic advocacy for systemic change, housing reform, wealth taxes, healthcare for all threatened the comfortable status quo that had made Kimmel a multimillionaire. She was too real, too direct, her voice resonating with a growing chorus of Americans tired of being ignored. To Kimmel, she was a problem. To his powerful allies, media moguls, corporate titans, political insiders, she was a threat. A week ago, in the dim glow of a private club, a network executive had leaned across a mahogany table, cigar smoke curling around his words. "Crockett's trouble, Jimmy. She's got traction. People listen. Your show's the perfect stage to cut her down." Kimmel had smirked, sensing not just an opportunity, but a thrill. This wasn't just a segment, it was a public execution cloaked in the guise of comedy. In his dressing room, Kimmel adjusted his tie, his reflection in the mirror cold and unyielding. He thrived on control, always knowing where the line was pushed just far enough for laughs, never so far as to lose his grip. Tonight he'd push harder, but not for humor. He'd spent days preparing attack lines, honed like daggers, misleading video clips edited to distort Crockett's words, talking points designed to paint her as a radical out of touch with real Americans. He imagined the headlines, "Kimmel exposes firebrand Congresswoman's dangerous agenda." His pulse quickened, a predator scenting blood. 5 minutes, Jimmy producer Mark called, adjusting Kimmel's mic with trembling hands. Mark's stomach churned. The pre-show briefing had been chilling. Kimmel's instructions were explicit. "I want her rattled. I want her exposed as the ivory tower ideologue she is. No mercy." Mark had hesitated, sensing something ugly in Kimmel's fervor, but he knew better than to argue. Kimmel's temper was legendary, and his network connections could end a career with a single phone call. Mark swallowed his unease and nodded, but as he left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line from which there'd be no return. In the green room, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, a still point in the manufactured storm. Her deep green blazer was crisp, her expression calm, but her fingers traced the edge of a note card, a rare sign of nerves. She'd studied Kimmel's show, his quick wit, his knack for cutting remarks that drew blood while keeping the audience laughing. She knew he was a formidable opponent, but she hadn't anticipated the venom she sensed in the air, a faint hostility that prickled her instincts like static before a storm. Her aide, Sarah, paced nervously, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "Congresswoman, stick to your points housing healthcare fairness. Don't let him bait you into a fight." Jasmine offered a reassuring smile, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at her. "I'm here for the people I represent, Sarah. That's my North Star." She'd faced hostile congressional hearings, hecklers at town halls, even anonymous threats that ascorbic acid. A talk show host, no matter how powerful, was just another voice. But as she smoothed her blazer, she couldn't shake the feeling that this stage was different. A coliseum where the crowd wasn't just watching, but judging, manipulated by a master of spectacle. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the faces of her constituents, a mother in Dallas clutching an eviction notice, a veteran in Houston rationing insulin. This is for them, she thought, steeling herself. The band blared Kimmel onto the stage, a brassy fanfare heralding his arrival. The applause, amplified and sweetened, thundered through the studio. Kimmel basked in it, arms outstretched, a conductor absorbing the energy of his orchestra. His monologue was sharper than usual, laced with pointed jabs at self-righteous politicians who think they know better than the rest of us and live in ivory towers while preaching to the masses. The audience laughed on cue, conditioned to obey, but a few exchanged glances, sensing an edge that wasn't entirely playful. And tonight, Kimmel said, his voice dripping with mock warmth, a glint of malice in his eyes. "We have a very special guest. She's making waves in Washington, or so she claims. Please welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." The applause was polite, tinged with curiosity. Jasmine walked on her stride, unhurried, her smile calm but guarded. She shook Kimmel's hand, its grip cold and unyielding like grasping a blade. As she settled into the plush armchair, the studio lights blazed down, turning the stage into an interrogation chamber. The audience's faces blurred into a sea of expectation, and Jasmine felt the weight of millions watching beyond the glass. Kimmel leaned forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, a predator sizing up his prey. "Congresswoman, welcome to the show. Big fan of, well, anyone who can survive that swamp you call Washington." A ripple of laughter from the audience primed for his folksy charm. "But your idea's pretty ambitious, right? Almost like they're written by someone who hasn't balanced a checkbook in a while." The jab was classic Kimmel relatable cutting designed to paint her as an elitist from the outset. The audience chuckled, waiting for her to falter. Jasmine's smile didn't waver, though her pulse quickened. She'd expected a barb, but the venom in his tone was sharper than anticipated. "Mr. Kimmel," she said, her voice even, "my policies come from sitting with families facing eviction parents who can't afford their children's medicine. Balancing a checkbook is one thing. Balancing survival on a poverty wage is another." Kimmel's eyes narrowed, but his grin held a mask of charm barely concealing the steel beneath. "Right, the people. Politicians love that word, don't they? But let's get specific. Your plans. Massive. Government spending tax hikes on job creators. Won't that just tank the economy? Make everyone poorer? Or is the goal equal? Misery for all?" He smirked, glancing at his band leader, Reggie, who supplied a rehearsed chuckle right on cue. Jasmine kept her gaze steady, her voice measured but firm. "The goal, Mr. Kimmel, is an economy that works for everyone, not just the top 1%. It's about the wealthiest and most profitable corporations paying their fair share so communities can thrive, better schools, affordable healthcare homes people can actually afford. That's not misery, that's opportunity." Kimmel steepled his fingers, his tone mock thoughtful, a performer playing to the room. "Fair share. Sounds nice, real poetic. But who decides fair, you? A bunch of DC bureaucrats. Sounds a bit authoritarian, don't you think?" He winked at the camera, cueing the audience to smirk, and a few obliged, though others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the edge in his words. "I believe," Jasmine countered, "the government has a duty to ensure healthcare, education, and housing aren't luxuries reserved for the wealthy. When the market fails the vulnerable, when it prices life-saving drugs out of reach or leaves families homeless, the government steps in. That's not control, it's responsibility. It's about collective well-being." Collective, Kimmel repeated, drawing out the word as if it left a bitter taste. "Sounds dangerously close to, well, you know." He leaned in his voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some might say your policies aren't about helping the needy, they're about controlling the populace. We've got a clip here, something you said at a town hall last month. Roll clip A3, please." The screen behind them lit up with a grainy video of Jasmine speaking at a town hall. Her words spliced with surgical precision to sound incoherent and menacing. Complete overhaul. No choice but to comply. Essential for control. The edit was blatant context, shredded, her passionate call for regulating predatory lenders twisted into something sinister. The audience murmured, a mix of confusion and skepticism. Jasmine's stomach tightened, a cold knot forming. This wasn't an interview. It was a trap, meticulously laid. Kimmel turned to her, his face a mask of feigned concern, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Strong words, Congresswoman. No choice but to comply. Essential for control. Not exactly the voice of freedom, is it? Sounds like you want to dictate people's lives, cradle to grave." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Jasmine felt the weight of the cameras, the audience, the millions watching at home. She had to respond carefully. Anger would be his victory. A clip to be replayed endlessly as proof of her instability. But silence wasn't an option either. She took a slow breath, her mind racing, picturing the faces of those she fought for. "Stay true," she told herself. The studio air felt thick, charged with tension, the lights boring into Jasmine like a spotlight in a courtroom. Sarah in the wings gripped her clipboard, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with fear. The audience leaned forward, sensing a shift, their laughter replaced by an uneasy hush. Mr. Kimmel, Jasmine began, her voice low but resolute, each word chosen with precision. That clip was, to put it kindly, creatively edited. "What I was discussing was the need to regulate predatory lending practices that trap families in debt to ensure corporations comply with environmental standards that protect public health. It's about controlling exploitation, not people. Kimmel waved a dismissive hand, his grin tightening. Details, details. The sentiment, Congresswoman, is what people hear. And it sounds like you don't trust ordinary Americans to make their own decisions. His voice dropped venomous, his eyes boring into hers. Tell me, do you even like ordinary Americans? Or are they just pawns in your grand ideological game? The question was a naked provocation designed to elicit an emotional outburst, a soundbite to be weaponized. The audience held its breath, the silence heavy, expectant. Sarah's heart sank, fearing Jasmine would take the bait. Jasmine met Kimmel's gaze, her eyes unwavering, a calm fire burning within. Mr. Kimmel, she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet power. I've spent my entire career long before Congress working with ordinary Americans. I've held the hands of mothers whose children went to bed hungry. I've sat in cold apartments with seniors who couldn't afford their heating bills. I've seen the eviction notices you treat so glibly as punchlines. So yes, I not only like them, I respect them. I fight for them. The question is, Mr. Kimmel, when was the last time you truly saw them beyond a script for your monologue? A ripple of unease swept through the audience. The laughter was gone, replaced by a stunned silence. Kimmel's smile faltered a crack in his polished facade. He hadn't expected such directness, such a refusal to be flustered. His carefully laid trap was unraveling, and he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar panic. Oh, a bit defensive, are we? He sneered, recovering quickly, his voice dripping with condescension. Trying to turn this around on me, classic politician's deflection. But the people aren't stupid, Congresswoman. They see through your rhetoric. They see someone who wants to raise their taxes, dictate their choices, tell them what's good for them. He pivoted to a different camera, adopting a somber tone, his face a mask of concern. We've had calls, emails. People worried. A single mother from Ohio, let's call her Brenda. She works 2 jobs, barely makes ends meet. She's terrified your policies will mean she loses one of those jobs or that the cost of everything will skyrocket. What do you say to Brenda, Congresswoman? What hollow promises can you offer her tonight? Jasmine knew Brenda was likely a fabrication, a focus-grouped talking point designed to tug at heartstrings while setting her up to fail. But the pain Brenda represented was real, and Jasmine felt it acutely. She leaned slightly forward, ignoring Kimmel's mocking gaze, and looked directly into the camera he'd indicated, her eyes steady, her voice warm but resolute. To the real Brendas out there, she said, I see you. I know your fear, because I've sat with women like you, heard your stories, seen your strength. That fear is being stoked by those who profit from a system that keeps you working 2 jobs just to tread water. My policies are designed to lift your wages, to lower your healthcare costs, to ensure your children have access to good schools and a future. It's not about taking from you. It's about demanding that those who've benefited most from this economy, corporations, billionaires, invest back into the communities that make their success possible. Kimmel scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet studio. Pie in the sky, Congresswoman, Fantasyland economics. You talk about investment, I hear confiscation. You talk about community, I hear collectivism. Some people might even say your ideas are... He paused, letting the word hang, his eyes glinting with malice. Un-American. The accusation landed like a grenade, venomous and deliberate. The studio froze. Band members shifted uncomfortably. Crew members exchanged wary glances. The audience sat in stunned silence. This was no longer banter. It was a character assassination broadcast live to millions. Jasmine's heart pounded, but her face remained calm, her eyes burning with a steely resolve. Kimmel thought he had her cornered, his smirk daring her to crack. He was wrong. She felt the weight of her constituents' struggles, the mother in Dallas, the veteran in Houston, the countless faces she carried in her heart. They were her strength, her reason. She wouldn't let them down. Un-American, she repeated, her voice low but carrying a sudden electric power. The calm in her eyes was now infused with fire. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto Kimmel's. Let me ask you something, Mr. Kimmel. Is it un-American to believe that a child's access to a doctor shouldn't depend on their parents' income? Is it un-American to believe that an elderly person shouldn't have to choose between life-saving medication and keeping a roof over their head? Is it un-American to believe that a veteran who fought for this country shouldn't come home to sleep on its streets? Kimmel opened his mouth to interrupt, to unleash another prepackaged barb, but Jasmine pressed on, her voice rising slightly, cutting through his intended retort like a blade through silk. You sit here in this multi-million-dollar studio on your multi-million-dollar salary, and you have the audacity to call policies designed to alleviate suffering un-American. Let me tell you about the Americans I know. A father in Fort Worth rationing insulin-risking blindness because his insurance. One of your advertisers perhaps decided his life wasn't worth full coverage. A mother in El Paso, working 3 jobs, still facing eviction because her landlord raised the rent again. Those are the people I fight for, Mr. Kimmel. Who do you fight for? The silence that descended was absolute, a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. Kimmel's face, usually so mobile, so expressive in its comedic contortions, hardened into a mask of barely concealed fury. He was losing control of his stage, his narrative, his empire. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be flustered, defensive, easily caricatured. Instead, she was turning his own platform against him, exposing not just his ignorance but his complicity. That's a cheap shot, Congresswoman, he snarled, his voice losing its practiced smoothness, raw anger seeping through. Bringing my advertisers into this low blow. Typical. When you can't win on facts, you resort to personal attacks. Personal attacks. Jasmine's eyebrow arched, her tone, calm but cutting. You've spent the last 10 minutes misrepresenting my record, questioning my intelligence, insinuating I'm a threat to this country. And you call my pointing out the financial realities that shape our media landscape a low blow. A murmur rippled through the audience, not laughter, but something else. Agreement, discomfort, awe. She pressed on her voice, resonating with a sincerity that starkly contrasted Kimmel's increasingly brittle cynicism. You asked me about Brenda from Ohio. I want to ask you about someone. Anyone. Mr. Kimmel. When was the last time you had to choose between paying for your mother's insulin or keeping the lights on in your home? There it was, the question. Not delivered as a clever retort, but as a genuine, searing inquiry that cut to the core of the divide between them. The studio fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of truth. Kimmel stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, his smirk gone, his arrogance shattered. For a fleeting second, something flickered in his eyes, surprise, annoyance, or perhaps a pinprick of dawning unwelcome comprehension. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a flush of rage. He tried to recover, to muster a witty comeback, a dismissive laugh. That's absurd. He stammered, his voice thin, his face reddening. A false equivalency. You're dodging the question. Is it? Jasmine asked, her tone gentle now, but no less piercing. Because for millions of Americans, Mr. Kimmel, that isn't a hypothetical. It's a Tuesday. It's the kind of choice they face every single day while people in positions of power and influence like you debate their lives as if they're abstract concepts in a political game. The camera zoomed in on Kimmel's face, capturing a man unraveling. His producers in the control booth were frozen headsets on, mouths open. No one was feeding him lines now. The carefully constructed artifice of Jimmy Kimmel Live had cracked, and through that crack, a harsh, uncomfortable reality flooded in. Kimmel looked out at the audience, seeking his usual affirmation, but their faces were unreadable, staring not at him with adoration, but at Crockett with a new, profound interest. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A man in the back nodded slowly, as if seeing something clearly for the first time. The silence stretched taut and agonizing. Kimmel fumbled with his notes, his usual glibness deserting him entirely. He looked like a fighter who'd taken an unexpected, staggering blow and didn't know which way his corner was. In his earpiece, Mark hissed urgently, "Jimmy, say something. Go to commercial." Anything but Kimmel seemed momentarily deaf to the instruction. He was staring at Jasmine Crockett, his mind racing a torrent of emotions, rage, humiliation, fear churning within. He'd built his empire on control, on knowing how to spin any moment to his advantage. But this moment was slipping through his fingers, and with it his carefully crafted image. She hadn't just challenged him. She'd exposed him, held a mirror to his privilege, his disconnect, his cruelty, and the audience had seen it. He finally found his voice, but it was strained, almost petulant. We have to take a break. We'll be right back." The band startled into action, launched into a jarringly upbeat jingle, the notes clashing with the tension in the room. The applause sign flickered weakly, but the response from the audience was muted, hesitant. Many were still looking at Crockett, who who sat composed, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her eyes steady as if she'd just spoken a truth so undeniable it needed no further embellishment. As soon as the cameras cut, Kimmel slammed his notes onto the table, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell was that?" he roared at Mark, who'd rushed onto the set, his face pale. "You said she'd be an easy target. You said she was all rhetoric, no substance." His voice cracked, betraying not just anger but a dawning fear. He'd been exposed, and he knew it. "Jimmy, she blindsided us," Mark stammered, avoiding Kimmel's blazing eyes. "The insulin line. No one prepped for that." "We didn't expect blindsided." Kimmel's voice rose, venom lacing every syllable. "This is my show. I control the narrative. She made me look like a damn fool and out-of-touch privileged." He couldn't finish the words Crockett had implicitly thrown at him, now echoing in his mind. He stormed off the set, ignoring the crew's averted gazes, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. In his dressing room, he paced his mind, replaying the moment, his humiliation growing with each loop. "She made me look weak," he thought. Fists clenched. "She'll pay for this." Jasmine, meanwhile, was approached by Sarah, who looked both shaken and awed. "Congresswoman, that was incredible. You took him apart without raising your voice." Sarah's voice trembled, her eyes shining with admiration. Jasmine managed a small, tired smile, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I just told the truth, Sarah. Sometimes that's all you can do." But as she gathered her things, she felt the weight of what had happened. This wasn't just a TV segment. It was a gauntlet, and she'd walked through it unbroken. But she knew the fallout would be fierce. Kimmel wasn't the type to let this go, and his allies were even less forgiving. She glanced at Sarah, her voice soft but firm. "Get ready. This is just the beginning." When the show returned from commercial, Kimmel was visibly rattled. His usual smooth transitions were clumsy. His jokes fell flat, landing like stones in the uneasy silence. He cut the interview with Crockett short, pivoting hastily to a pre-recorded comedy sketch that felt jarringly out of place after the raw intensity of the preceding segment. He avoided eye contact with Jasmine, his movements stiff, his smile forced. The audience clapped politely, but the energy had shifted. They weren't laughing, they were thinking. As Jasmine left the studio, a strange quiet followed her. The usual backstage buzz was subdued staffers avoiding her gaze, not out of hostility, but perhaps out of a mix of respect and fear of Kimmel's wrath. A young intern, barely 20, caught her eye and gave a small nod as if to say, "I saw what you did." Jasmine nodded back a silent acknowledgement and stepped into the waiting car. By the time Jasmine's car pulled away from the studio lot, the internet was ablaze. Kimmel-Crockett showdown and insulin or electricity trended worldwide within minutes. Clips of the exchange, particularly Jasmine's devastating question. "When was the last time you had to choose?" spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Commentators hailed her. Jasmine Crockett just handed Jimmy Kimmel his head on a platter, and he didn't even see it coming. Never seen a talk show host so thoroughly and deservedly dismantled. Crockett's composure is a masterclass, pure, unadulterated truth. Kimmel's defenders, a mix of loyal fans and paid trolls, tried to push back, accusing Crockett of playing the victim or disrespecting a comedy show. But they were drowned out by a tidal wave of admiration for her poise and power. On TikTok, a single mother stitched the clip with her own story tears in her eyes as she held up a utility bill. "This is what she's talking about. This is my life." The video racked up millions of views. On YouTube, reaction channels dissected the moment, one host calling it the most uncomfortable silence in late-night history. Even mainstream outlets, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times ran segments framing it as a turning point in how media handles policy debates. Kimmel's powerful allies, the ones who'd suggested this takedown, were apoplectic. Instead of discrediting Crockett, Kimmel had amplified her message, turned her into a hero, and exposed himself as a callous shill for the establishment. In a sleek Manhattan office, the media mogul who'd sparked this fiasco slammed his phone down after a heated call with network executives. "Fix this or you're done," he barked at Kimmel's team. Sponsors, sensing the public's mood, made uneasy inquiries, their logos suddenly feeling like liabilities. Kimmel's throne, once unassailable, was trembling. Back in the car, Jasmine scrolled through her phone, her expression unreadable. Sarah, sitting beside her, read aloud a tweet from a prominent activist. "Crockett just proved why we need her in Washington. She's not just fighting for us, she's fighting with us." Jasmine nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the faces in the audience, the woman wiping her eyes, the man nodding. She thought of Angela Whitaker, a constituent she'd met months ago, a single mother in Akron, Ohio, who'd shared her story of choosing between insulin for her mother and keeping the electricity on. This was for you, Jasmine thought, her resolve hardening. For Jimmy Kimmel, the days that followed were a private hell, a descent into paranoia and rage. His ratings took a nosedive, the once loyal audience tuning out their laughter replaced by skepticism. Social media was relentless memes mocking his stunned silence flooding every platform. One viral image superimposed Jasmine's question over a frozen Kimmel. When you realize you picked the wrong fight. Another, a looping gif of his stammering response, was captioned, "Jimmy Kimmel learns what happens when you punch up." At home, Kimmel paced his sprawling Los Angeles mansion, the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a man unraveling. He replayed the interview obsessively, each viewing stoking his anger and humiliation. He couldn't see his own flaws, his cruelty, his disconnect, his willingness to serve as a pawn for powerful interests. In his mind, he was the victim. Crockett had cheated, used emotional blackmail to manipulate the audience. He railed at his staff, blaming them for inadequate preparation for failing to protect him. Mark, the producer, bore the brunt of his fury, fired in a public outburst that left the crew stunned. "You're all useless," Kimmel shouted in a meeting, his voice hoarse. "I'm Jimmy Kimmel. I don't lose." But the world was watching, and it disagreed. His monologues grew bitter, laced with subtle jabs at Crockett, calling her supporters unhinged mobs and framing himself as a victim of cancel culture. But the audience wasn't buying it. His jokes sounded hollow, his attacks petty. The magic that had made him a cultural titan was gone, replaced by the image of a sore loser. Network executives, once deferential, now demanded explanations, their patience thinning. "Fix your image," Jimmy one warned in a tense call, "or we'll fix it for you." Kimmel's powerful benefactors, the moguls who'd pushed for Crockett's takedown, began to distance themselves. Invitations to exclusive parties dried up, replaced by cold silence. A once constant stream of deferential calls ceased. Kimmel felt the walls closing and his empire crumbling. One night alone in his office, he stared at a framed photo of himself with a former president, a symbol of his untouchable status. Now it mocked him. He hurled it against the wall glass, shattering across the hardwood floor. "I'm not done," he muttered, but the words rang hollow. A desperate mantra against an undeniable truth. He was losing everything. His team scrambled to salvage the situation. Floating ideas for damage control, a heartfelt apology, a charity stunt, a guest appearance by a beloved celebrity to shift focus. But Kimmel rejected them all, his pride a prison. "I'm not groveling," he snapped at a crisis PR consultant. "She doesn't get to win." But deep down, a gnawing fear took root maybe she already had. For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath was a whirlwind of opportunity and responsibility. Her office was flooded with messages, letters, emails, voicemails, donations, pouring in from across the country. Ordinary Americans inspired by her stand sent handwritten notes. "You spoke for me. I've never felt seen until now." Invitations to speak flooded in NPR, CBS, The Breakfast Club, even international outlets like the BBC. Jasmine handled the spotlight with the same grace she'd shown on Kimmel's stage, refusing to gloat or capitalize on the moment for personal gain. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter, her voice steady. "It's about the people who feel invisible." Her question, "When was the last time you had to choose between your mother's insulin or keeping the lights on?" became a rallying cry, a shorthand for the brutal choices faced by millions. Activists printed it on protest signs, lawmakers cited it in congressional debates, and community organizers used it to galvanize local campaigns. Policy discussions shifted, with healthcare reform and housing equity gaining traction in ways they hadn't before. The New York Times ran an op-ed titled "Jasmine Crockett's Question Changed the Conversation," crediting her with humanizing complex issues. In Akron, Ohio, Angela Whitaker sat in her dimly lit kitchen, an eviction notice crumpled on the table. She'd watched the Kimmel clip on her phone, tears streaming as Jasmine's words hit home. Angela had faced that exact choice: insulin for her mother or electricity for her two children. The shame, the fear, the exhaustion had nearly broken her. But hearing a congresswoman articulate her struggle with such clarity and stand up to a powerful media figure who'd mocked it filled Angela with a validation she hadn't felt in years. "She saw me," Angela whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. The next day, she called a community action group Jasmine had mentioned in a speech, finding resources to keep her lights on and a job training program to rebuild her life. For the first time in months, Angela felt a flicker of hope. Jasmine's national profile skyrocketed. but she stayed grounded. At a town hall in Dallas, she met a veteran named Thomas, who'd seen the clip while couch surfing after losing his apartment. "You made me feel like my struggle matters," he said, his voice shaking, his eyes red. Jasmine hugged him, her own eyes misty, her voice soft. "You always mattered, Thomas. We're going to keep fighting for you." Moments like these were her fuel, reminding her why she'd run for office, why she'd faced Kimmel's gauntlet. The Kimmel showdown hadn't been planned, but it had cracked open a conversation America needed. Jasmine used her platform to amplify the voiceless, writing op-eds, holding rallies, always circling back to real people. She became a symbol of resistance, not just against Kimmel, but against a system designed to silence the vulnerable. At a rally in Chicago, she stood before a crowd of thousands, her voice ringing out. "They want us to stay quiet to accept the status quo, but we're done being silent. Our struggles aren't punchlines, they're our power." Months later, Jasmine sat in her DC office, a stack of constituent letters on her desk. One caught her eye, written in careful, looping handwriting. It was from Angela Whitaker. "The lights are back on, Congresswoman. I'm starting a job training program, and my kids are sleeping better. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." Jasmine read it twice, her throat tight, then tucked it into a folder labeled "Why I Fight." She turned down glossy TV specials and primetime offers, choosing town halls and community centers over Hollywood lights. Her fight was in kitchens like Angela's, not studios. Kimmel's show limped on, but its spark was gone. He avoided mentioning Jasmine, but the internet didn't forget. A viral hashtag. Ask Jimmy mocked his silence with questions. "When was the last time you faced a real choice, Jimmy?" Still waiting for an answer. Kimmel. His ratings never recovered, hovering at historic lows. Sponsors pulled back their logos, replaced by lesser brands. Network executives floated, replacing him, whispers of a fresh face, circulating in boardrooms. Kimmel was still rich, still on air, but his power had eroded his name, now synonymous with a moment of hubris and defeat. One evening, in a quiet moment, Jasmine stood on her apartment balcony, the DC skyline glittering below. She thought of the studio, the lights, the silence after her question. She thought of Angela Thomas and the countless others whose stories she carried. The gauntlet had been brutal, but she'd emerged stronger. Her voice amplified, her mission clear. Kimmel had tried to break her, to enforce the silence of a system that thrived on invisibility. He'd failed. And in his failure, a new chorus had risen, a chorus of voices demanding to be heard, to be seen, to be fought for. The studio lights would continue to blaze. The laughter would return, but the landscape had shifted. A crack had appeared in the polished veneer, and through it people glimpsed the possibility of a different kind of conversation, a different kind of leadership. It all started because one woman refused to be diminished, choosing instead to illuminate the truth, one devastating question at a time. As Jasmine looked out at the city, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning."